and to bring about an artificial scarcity, because, I mean, at the end of the day, food shortages probably are coming.
We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems and supply chains will be deeply affected.
But then, as we were saying, that's not to say that food shortages aren't coming, because I'm pretty certain that they are actually coming at this point. Fertilizer prices, as we were just talking about before the podcast, have been rising anyway, but obviously these have spiked because of the invasion of Russia and the sanctions, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that we've put on Russia in return. Russia happens to be one of the largest exporters of fertilizer, and who knew until this happened? Until everyone was like, okay, there are consequences to you sanctioning this massive country that produces stuff that we need. Fertilizer costs have apparently doubled from a year ago as the war in Ukraine has disrupted the flow of supplies from Russia, the world's largest exporter of the commodity. It's contributed for higher global prices for food, especially corn. Corn is the most fertilizer-intensive crop and is likely to be the most impacted by rising input costs driven by the prices, according to, again, one of the industry things. And
well, apparently it's worse than that, because we were looking at the graph before we started, and it's tripled now. So it rose from like $80 to $200 per presumably ton because of pandemic, and then just has spiked again because, well, Russia can't export their fertilizer now. And
so it's over triple the cost that it was a couple of years ago. So not good. And Joe Biden is actually aware of this and has actually told everyone this. It's just that it gets lost in the reporting of him being a bumbling buffoon. This is a direct quote from him, right? We did talk about food shortages. It's going to be real. The final price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia, it's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well. So Biden sanctioning Russia is something he's aware is going to cause Americans to go hungry. I'm just saying, when the president of the United States, no matter how absent he is in every other capacity, says, look, we're probably going to be experiencing food shortages, maybe it is worth listening.
Whose fault could it possibly be as well?
Well, yeah. But don't worry, experts to the rescue, Callum.
Oh.
The experts have chimed in.
The fact checkers have turned up to tell me that don't look at the old man.
Yeah, don't listen to that old kook. He's nobody of any importance. Food shortages are unlikely to occur in the US, and someone from CNBC who apparently knows what they're talking about has arrived to tell you why, right?
They've never been to a farm. Probably never left the city, but...
Yes, that's exactly right? I love the framing on this as well. Meanwhile, food prices in the US are rising at historic rates, but don't worry about that. It's like, no, I am worried about that because I eat food. Well,
I'm a food enjoyer.
yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, I am genuinely concerned about that,
I'm
right?
not a big fan.
While prices for commodities like wheat and corn are at their highest levels in a decade, what's more, the US Department of Agriculture predicts that food-at-home prices will see an increase of up to 4% by the end of 2022. It's important to realize that the US doesn't import very much from Ukraine, explained Joseph Glauber, a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. But that's not what we were talking about. We weren't like, oh no, we're not going to get grain supplies from Ukraine. We're not going to get fertilizer from Russia. Like, why would you say that, Joseph? Unless you were deliberately trying to mislead people? Right, the next one, we may see some shelves that are empty for various kinds of food products like we have for a while now as we recover from the pandemic, says Scott Irwin, the chair of the agricultural marketing at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. But I can say with some real confidence that in the United States, the average consumer is not going to see a shortage of bread because of what's going on in Ukraine. No, they're going to see a shortage of bread because they can't afford the bread. Because less will have been made, because it requires Russian fertilizer, and we're not importing Russian fertilizer. But it's amazing how the fact checkers like, don't worry, we don't get grain from Ukraine. It's like, yeah, but that wasn't the question.
I have seen in the Discord as well, I don't know if you were going to mention, but there's I can't remember the chap's name, but he keeps mentioning the fact that Russia's also a massive exporter of food to third world countries.
Yes.
Not out of the goodness of their hearts, because...
Weirdly, Egypt.
Yeah, and these shipments apparently aren't going to happen anymore.
No.
So... a bunch of the third world is now looking at...
Ukraine as well. Massive, yeah. It's really, really weird. But I remember we were looking at this the other day, and I was just like, why would Egypt, a place that gets 2 harvests a year, need to import grain? Like, if you can't grow wheat in Egypt, what can you do?
It's run by Egyptians, so.
Well, yeah, sorry, I don't know tell you. But anyway, so, and just to hammer this home, people in the UK thinking, well, at least I don't live in America, not my problem. Yeah, we're going to get this. We're going to get food shortages here too. And this was literally today that the Independent published this, because farmers have warned that the UK is sleepwalking into food shortages because of rising costs of fuel, fertilizer, and feed. One farmer in Snowdonia told GB News, "We're walking into food shortages, and that's a fact. I could take you to 10 farms in the surrounding area now that have been turning down their production. Chicken farmers, egg producers, milk producers, even beef and lamb, because feed prices are going through the roof. We've got absolutely ridiculous fertilizer prices, and we can't forget that half the food produced in this world comes from artificial fertilizer. The price of nitrogen fertilizer, of course, gone up to £1,000 a ton." So I don't really have that much to add there, although I think that it's not a conspiracy. I think that this is actually the consequence of poor management.
I mean, demonstrably.
Knee-jerk political maneuvers.
Well, the fertilizer one's an easy one as well, because you can just look at the graph. I mean, just look up if you're at home,
Yeah.
because we didn't load it up. But the graph is just fertilizer prices over time graph, and you'll just get, it's basically constant until the pandemic season, in which the politicians decided that they would ruin the entire economy.
Yep.
For reasons unknown. And then it just completely spikes.
Yeah.
And then war in Ukraine spikes again.
Yeah. But anyway, so the food processing plant's probably not a consequence of WEF conspiracy, although food shortages are coming.
We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
The Great Reset Initiative is an economic agenda drawn up by the World Economic Forum WEF in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The project was launched in June 2020, whereby WEF Chief Executive Officer Klaus Schwab described 3 core components of the Great Reset